The bustling main terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was alive with the hum of travelers and announcements echoing over the intercom. Sunlight streamed through massive glass windows, reflecting off the polished floors. Sarah Collins gripped Max's leash tightly, her sharp green eyes scanning the crowd. There was an edge to the day that she couldn't ignore, and judging by Max's taut posture, neither could he. An anonymous tip had come in earlier about a suspicious locked locker in one of the quieter cargo terminals. These leads were a mixed bag. Sometimes they turned up nothing more than forgotten luggage. Other times it was worse. Max, her loyal Belgian Malinois partner, had been uncharacteristically quiet during the ride over, his amber eyes sharp and focused as if he already sensed the stakes. When they stepped into the dimly lit cargo hallway, the hum of the main terminal faded to nothing. The quiet was oppressive, broken only by the soft rhythm of Sarah's boots and the faint click of Max's claws on the concrete floor. The locker they were looking for was old, its paint peeling, and rust had claimed the corners of the metal frame. Max froze suddenly, his ears snapping forward and his nose twitching. "Got something, buddy?" Sarah asked softly. Max let out a low, quiet growl, his posture stiffening as he pulled toward the locker. Her heart rate quickened. Max didn't growl unless there was something worth growling at. She approached cautiously, her free hand on the small flashlight clipped to her belt. Flicking it on, she inspected the area around the locker. Nothing seemed out of place, at least not at first glance. But Max was insistent, pawing at the bottom edge of the locker and glancing back at her with urgency in his eyes. "All right, let's see what's got you so worked up," she murmured, pulling out her set of tools to pop the lock. As the old mechanism gave way with a sharp metallic snap, Sarah pulled open the door and immediately recoiled. Inside, the stench hit her first, a mix of old blood and decay. Her flashlight beam illuminated a grim collection: dog collars smeared with dried blood, a small case of syringes filled with a murky substance, and a ledger filled with names and dollar amounts. Her stomach churned as she pieced it together. This wasn't just a locker, it was evidence of something far darker. "Rin, fight betting?" she whispered, more to herself than to Max, who was now sitting alert, his nose twitching toward the locker's contents. The sound of approaching footsteps broke her concentration. Sarah spun around, her hand instinctively moving to her holstered weapon, but it was just one of the airport security officers. "Officer Collins, what's the deal here?" the man asked, his voice steady but curious as his eyes fell on the open locker. "It's not good," Sarah said grimly. "We need to lock this area down. Whatever this is, it's bigger than just a locker in an airport." Max let out a low whine, his gaze fixed on something deeper in the locker that Sarah hadn't yet noticed. Following his lead, she crouched and reached further into the shadows, her fingers brushing against something cold and metallic. When she pulled it out, she froze. A small, rusted chain, not for securing luggage, but far too small. It was meant for a dog, and the blood staining the links told a horrific story. Sarah swallowed hard, her grip tightening on the chain. "This isn't just about money," she said, her voice low and tense. "Someone's using this airport as part of a much larger operation." Max gave a sharp bark, as if in agreement, and Sarah felt a jolt of determination shoot through her. Whoever was behind this, they weren't just preying on the defenseless, they were doing it right under her nose. And that was something she couldn't let stand. As she secured the scene and prepared to report her findings, Sarah glanced down at Max, who was still staring at the locker, his amber eyes unwavering. "Looks like we've got work to do," she said, giving his head a quick pat. Max wagged his tail once, a signal of silent agreement, and with that, the real investigation began. The drive away from the airport was tense. The evidence Sarah had collected sat sealed in the back of her SUV, and Max lay quietly beside her, his gaze fixed out the window. Sarah's mind raced as she replayed the scene in the locker. Blood-stained collars, syringes, betting logs, it all pointed to a grisly underground operation. She'd seen horrors in her career, but the deliberate cruelty that surrounded dogfighting made her stomach turn. Back at the precinct, Sarah spread the items out on a table in the evidence room, her gloved hands careful as she examined each piece. The ledger was the most promising lead, filled with names, dates, and amounts. One name jumped out at her immediately: R. Daniels. It was scrawled next to the largest transactions, a clear indication that this person was central to the operation. Max sat by her feet, his ears perked up as if sensing her focus. Sarah absent-mindedly reached down to scratch his head. "What do you think, partner? Daniels sounds like someone we need to meet." Max responded with a soft bark, his tail thumping once against the floor. It was moments like this that reminded Sarah just how much of a team they truly were. Later that evening, Sarah drove to the address listed next to R. Daniels in the ledger. It was in a rundown part of town, where the streetlights flickered and every shadow seemed to hold a secret. The house was a dilapidated one-story structure with a chain-link fence surrounding it. Max let out a low growl as Sarah parked the car a short distance away. "Easy, boy," she murmured, but she couldn't ignore the unease that crept up her spine. Something about the place felt wrong. She and Max approached the house cautiously. The front yard was littered with old car parts and discarded furniture, and the faint sound of barking came from somewhere in the back. Sarah's hand hovered near her holstered weapon as she knocked on the door. The sound echoed, but no one answered. Max pulled against the leash, his nose twitching wildly. "Hold on," Sarah whispered, her voice low. She walked around the side of the house, following Max's lead. The barking grew louder, more frantic, until they reached the backyard. There, tethered to a short, rusty chain, was a dog, a pit bull mix with scars crisscrossing its body. It cowered as they approached, its tail tucked between its legs. Max immediately went still, his head tilting slightly as he took in the pitiful sight. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, crouching down to get a better look. The dog's ribs were visible beneath its mangy coat, and its eyes were wide with fear. She reached out a hand slowly, her heart breaking at the way the dog flinched. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" Max let out a soft whine, taking a step closer to the injured dog. To Sarah's surprise, the pit bull didn't pull away from him. Instead, it sniffed cautiously at Max, its body trembling. Before Sarah could think of her next move, the sound of a door slamming behind her made her whirl around. A man stood on the porch, his face shadowed under a baseball cap. "You lost, lady?" His voice was gruff, and his eyes darted nervously to the backyard. He didn't miss the way Sarah had her hand near her weapon, or how Max had shifted into a protective stance beside her. "I'm Officer Collins, Atlanta PD," she said firmly. "We've received reports of illegal activity in the area. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" The man's jaw tightened. "Ain't nothing illegal going on here," he said, his tone defensive. "You're trespassing. You and your dog should leave." "I'll leave when I'm done," Sarah shot back. "What's the dog's name?" The man's hesitation was all the answer she needed. Without waiting for his response, Sarah pulled out her phone and started snapping pictures of the dog and the surroundings. The man cursed under his breath and stormed back into the house, slamming the door behind him. Sarah took a deep breath, her adrenaline still surging. "We'll get you out of here," she promised the pit bull, her voice soft. She unclipped the chain and looped it loosely around the dog's neck. The animal hesitated, looking between her and Max, before finally taking a tentative step forward. Back at the precinct, Sarah placed the rescued dog in the care of the department's animal cruelty unit. As the dog was carried away for medical treatment, Max watched intently, his tail wagging slightly as if to reassure the frightened animal. "You did good today, buddy," Sarah said, kneeling to ruffle Max's fur. He licked her cheek in response, a small gesture that made the weight of the day feel a little lighter. But as Sarah sat down at her desk to review the evidence, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The man at the house wasn't the ringleader. He was just another cog in the machine, and if she wanted to stop this operation for good, she'd have to dig deeper. Max lay at her feet, his amber eyes watching her closely as if sensing her resolve. Sarah glanced down at him and smiled faintly. "Guess we've got a long road ahead," she said, And as always, Max was ready to follow her every step of the way. The precinct was quiet in the early hours of the morning, save for the steady hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Sarah sat at her desk, staring at the open case file in front of her. Beside her, Max rested his head on his paws, his amber eyes watching her with quiet attentiveness. The rescued pit bull, now safe and recovering, lingered in her thoughts, stirring memories she had long kept buried. She reached for the ledger recovered from the locker, her fingers trailing over the name that had caught her attention before. R. Daniels. The name stirred something deep in her chest, a flicker of recognition she couldn't quite place. She leaned back in her chair, letting her mind wander to a time long before Max, long before she became a K-9 officer. It was a summer afternoon when Sarah first realized how much animals could change a person's life. She was 9 years old, standing in the backyard of her childhood home, holding a bowl of water out to a stray dog that had wandered into their neighborhood. The dog, a scruffy mix with matted fur and a limp, had hesitated at first, but eventually crept forward to drink. Her older brother Ryan had watched from the porch, laughing softly. "Looks like you've made a new friend," he'd said. Ryan had always been the protector, the one who brought home injured birds and nursed them back to health, who taught her how to be gentle with creatures smaller than herself. He was the reason she'd become a police officer, the reason she cared so deeply about justice. But Ryan's kindness hadn't saved him. Years later, his compassion had led him to intervene in a dogfighting ring he'd discovered near their neighborhood. Sarah still remembered the night she got the call. He'd been beaten badly, left unconscious in a field. By the time the ambulance arrived, it was too late. Sarah's jaw tightened at the memory. She hadn't been able to save Ryan, but she'd vowed that day to do everything in her power to stop the kind of cruelty that had taken his life. Max let out a low whine, pulling Sarah from her thoughts. She reached down to scratch behind his ears, her touch gentle. "You know," she said softly, "you remind me a lot of him sometimes." Max tilted his head, his eyes locking onto hers as if he understood. Sarah smiled faintly and turned her attention back to the ledger. She had to figure out who R. Daniels was and how he fit into this operation. The answer wasn't in the precinct. She needed to get back into the field. The next address tied to Daniels wasn't in the city. It was in a rural area on the outskirts of Atlanta. Sarah and Max drove for nearly an hour, the landscape shifting from urban sprawl to rolling fields and dense forests. The property in question was listed as a storage facility, but as Sarah approached, it became clear that it was anything but. The building was a dilapidated barn, its roof sagging and its wooden exterior weathered by time. Max's ears perked up as they stepped out of the SUV, his nose working overtime. Sarah unhooked his leash, trusting him to lead her where she needed to go. "Find it, Max," she said, her voice steady. Max moved with purpose, his body low to the ground as he sniffed the perimeter of the barn. He stopped abruptly near a stack of old crates, pawing at the ground and letting out a sharp bark. Sarah crouched down, her gloved hands brushing away the dirt and debris. Beneath it, she uncovered a hidden hatch. Her heart pounded as she pried it open, revealing a narrow staircase leading into darkness. Gripping her flashlight, she descended cautiously, Max close at her side. The air grew colder as they moved deeper, and the faint sound of whimpering reached her ears. Her stomach clenched as her flashlight beam illuminated the space below. Cages, dozens of them lining the walls of the underground room. Inside were dogs of all shapes and sizes, their eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. The sight was overwhelming, but Sarah didn't allow herself to falter. These animals needed her, and she wasn't about to let them down. Max barked sharply, his focus shifting to the far corner of the room. Sarah followed his gaze and saw a desk cluttered with papers and cash. Above it, a corkboard was pinned with photos and notes, evidence of a sprawling operation. Her flashlight landed on a photo in the center of the board, and her breath caught in her throat. The man in the picture was R. Daniels, standing beside a pit bull with fresh scars and a leash taut in his grip. Sarah called for backup. her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. While she waited, she moved through the room, opening cages and soothing the terrified dogs. Max stayed by her side, his presence a calming force for both her and the animals. When the backup arrived, the scene turned into a whirlwind of activity. The dogs were transported to safety, and the evidence was meticulously documented. Sarah handed over the photo of Daniels, her resolve hardening. This was no longer just about justice, it was personal. As she loaded Max into the SUV for the ride back, she glanced at him in the rearview mirror. His amber eyes met hers, and she felt a surge of gratitude for the bond they shared. "We're going to end this," she said firmly. Max let out a soft bark, his tail wagging once. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt like she was finally getting closer to peace. The sun was setting as Sarah pulled into the precinct parking lot, her mind racing with what she'd found at the barn. The image of the terrified dogs in their cages haunted her, but it also fueled her determination. Max leapt out of the SUV, his body relaxed, but his eyes sharp. He seemed to sense the shift in her energy, staying close to her side as they walked inside. The evidence recovered from the barn was laid out in front of her, but it was the photograph of R. Daniels that drew her focus. The man in the picture had the smug, confident air of someone who thought he'd never be caught. His face was now etched in Sarah's memory, a ghost of the past she couldn't shake. As the precinct bustled with activity around her, Sarah flipped through the ledger again, cross-referencing the names and addresses with the photos pinned on the corkboard. Daniels wasn't working alone. There were others, and they were scattered across Atlanta and its outskirts. The network was larger than she had anticipated, and time wasn't on her side. "Sarah?" Her captain's voice broke her concentration. She looked up to see Captain Avery standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "You're going after Daniels, aren't you?" She hesitated. "I have to. He's the center of this." Avery sighed, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him. "You're not wrong, but you're running out of resources. You can't take down an operation like this on instinct alone." Sarah straightened, her jaw tightening. "With all due respect, Captain, I have more than instinct. I have evidence, leads, and Max. We've already uncovered 2 key locations. Daniels is next." Avery studied her for a moment before nodding. "All right, but tread carefully. I've seen what happens when cases like this get personal." Hours later, Sarah and Max were on the road again, heading toward the address tied to Daniels's most recent activity. This time, it was a warehouse on the edge of an industrial district, a place tucked far enough away that no one would notice suspicious activity. As they approached, Sarah killed the headlights, parking a block away. She leaned over to Max, her hand brushing his fur. "Ready, partner?" Max gave a quiet bark, his tail wagging once. Sarah grabbed her flashlight and weapon, stepping out into the cool night air. The warehouse loomed ahead, its windows dark and its exterior showing years of neglect. Sarah approached cautiously, Max moving beside her in silence. The faint sound of voices carried through the night, coming from somewhere inside. They slipped through a side entrance, the air inside thick with the stench of oil and something sour. Sarah's flashlight cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of abandoned machinery and crates stacked high. Max froze suddenly, his body tense. His nose twitched as he caught a scent, and he turned sharply toward a door at the back of the warehouse. Sarah followed his lead, her pulse quickening. She pushed the door open slowly, revealing a room filled with makeshift pens and cages. The whimpering of dogs echoed in the confined space. Her heart sank as her flashlight swept across the scene. This wasn't just a storage facility, it was an active holding area for the ring's fighters. Max growled low in his throat, his ears pinned back as his gaze locked onto movement at the far end of the room. A man emerged from the shadows, his features illuminated by Sarah's beam. R. Daniels. "Well, well," Daniels drawled, his voice laced with disdain. "Looks like the cops finally caught up. Took you long enough." Sarah raised her weapon, her voice steady. "You're done, Daniels. Step away from the cages and get on the ground." Daniels smirked, his hands raising slightly in mock surrender. "You really think you're walking out of here with me that easily? You don't know who you're messing with." Before Sarah could respond, a loud bang reverberated through the warehouse. One of Daniels' accomplices had entered, wielding a weapon. The room erupted into chaos. Sarah ducked behind a crate as shots rang out, her heart pounding. Max barked furiously, staying low by her side. "Stay close, Max," she whispered, peeking around the edge of the crate. She caught a glimpse of Daniels retreating toward an exit. He wasn't going to get away, not this time. She signaled Max with a quick hand motion. "Go!" Max bolted, moving with precision and speed. He weaved through the chaos, his sharp instincts guiding him straight to Daniels. With a leap, Max brought the man down, his teeth gripping the sleeve of Daniels' jacket. Sarah moved quickly, disarming the accomplice before he could cause further harm. By the time she reached Max, Daniels was on the ground, pinned beneath the dog's weight. His smirk was gone, replaced by a look of sheer panic. "All right, Max," Sarah said, her voice firm. "Release." Max obeyed instantly, stepping back but remaining alert. Sarah cuffed Daniels, her heart pounding as she looked him in the eye. "It's over." Back at the precinct, the dogs were transferred to safety, and Daniels was booked. Sarah watched as Max paced by her side, his energy still high from the adrenaline of the night. "You did good, buddy," she said, crouching to ruffle his fur. He licked her cheek in response, his tail wagging. But as Sarah sat at her desk to finalize the report, she couldn't shake the feeling that the operation wasn't over yet. Daniels might be in custody, but the network was far-reaching. There were others still out there, and Sarah knew she wouldn't rest until every last one of them was brought to justice. The precinct was buzzing with activity in the aftermath of Daniels' capture. Officers worked to process the evidence retrieved from the warehouse, while animal welfare groups coordinated the transport and care of the rescued dogs. Despite the progress, Sarah felt no sense of closure. The look in Daniels' eyes as he was led away had been haunting, a mix of defiance and smugness, as if he still held the upper hand. She sat in the briefing room with Captain Avery, poring over the latest intel. Daniels had finally cracked under interrogation, revealing the location of a massive event planned for the weekend, a large-scale dogfighting ring disguised as a private auction. The location? An abandoned junkyard on the outskirts of the city. "This is it," Sarah said, her voice firm. "If we take this down, we dismantle the entire network." Avery nodded. "You'll have backup, but this will be risky. They'll be armed and ready for trouble. Are you sure you want to lead this?" Sarah glanced down at Max, who sat obediently at her side, his amber eyes watching her with unwavering loyalty. "We're ready," she said simply. The sun was just beginning to set as Sarah and her team arrived near the junkyard. The sprawling lot was surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence, with towering piles of scrap metal casting long shadows. Armed officers fanned out, taking their positions around the perimeter. Sarah and Max would enter with a small tactical team, aiming to locate and secure the dogs while apprehending the ringleaders. Sarah knelt down to Max's level, her hand resting gently on his harness. "This is the big one, buddy," she said softly. "Stay close." Max gave a low whine, his tail wagging once in understanding. They moved silently through a gap in the fence, the air thick with the acrid smell of oil and rust. Sarah's pulse quickened as they approached a cluster of makeshift pens near the center of the lot. The faint sound of barking reached her ears, followed by the low murmur of voices. She signaled for her team to hold position as she and Max crept closer. Inside the pens were dozens of dogs, their barks a mix of fear and desperation. Max growled low in his throat, his body tense. Sarah's heart ached at the sight, but there was no time to falter. She whispered into her radio, "We've found the dogs. Moving in." The moment they stepped into the clearing, chaos erupted. A guard spotted them and shouted a warning, drawing the attention of the others. Gunfire broke out, forcing Sarah and her team to take cover behind a stack of scrap metal. Max stayed close, his ears pinned back and his eyes locked on the danger. Sarah peeked out from behind the cover, spotting Daniels among the group. He was barking orders, his voice cutting through the noise. She gritted her teeth. He wasn't going to slip away this time. "Cover me!" she shouted to her team, then gave Max the command, "Take him down!" Max bolted forward, a blur of speed and precision. Daniel saw him coming and tried to flee, but Max was too fast. He leapt, his powerful jaws locking onto Daniel's arm and bringing him to the ground. Sarah sprinted after him, her weapon trained on the remaining guards. "Drop your weapons," she commanded, her voice firm and unyielding. One by one, the men complied, realizing they were outnumbered. With the situation under control, Sarah and her team began freeing the dogs. Each animal was checked and loaded into transport vans, their whimpers of fear gradually giving way to relief. Max moved among them, his presence calming even the most frightened. Sarah watched as one particularly timid dog, a small terrier with matted fur, sniffed cautiously at Max before leaning into him for comfort. "You're a natural, aren't you?" Sarah said, her voice filled with pride. Back at the precinct, Daniels and his accomplices were processed, and the rescued dogs were examined by veterinarians. Sarah sat at her desk, exhaustion finally setting in. Max lay at her feet, his eyes half closed but still alert. Captain Avery entered the room, a rare smile on his face. "You did it, Collins. The ring's dismantled, and every one of those dogs has a second chance because of you and Max." Sarah nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "It wasn't just us. Everyone played a part." Avery chuckled. "True, but you're the one who wouldn't let this go. Take some pride in that." She looked down at Max, who wagged his tail lazily. "I think we'll celebrate with a long nap," she said, earning a soft bark from her partner. As she gathered her things, Sarah felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The ghosts of her past hadn't disappeared, but they felt quieter now, overshadowed by the work she and Max had done. Together, they had made a difference, and that was enough. The morning light streamed through the windows of Sarah's modest home as she sat on the back porch, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. Max lay at her feet, his head resting on his paws, his eyes half closed in contentment. The events of the past week still lingered in her mind, but for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt a sense of closure. The operation to dismantle the dogfighting ring had been a resounding success. R. Daniels and his accomplices were facing lengthy prison sentences, and the network they had built was in shambles. Most importantly, the dogs rescued from their clutches were on the road to recovery, many of them already placed with foster families or in rehabilitation programs. Sarah sipped her coffee, watching as Max perked up at the sound of birds chirping nearby. "What do you think, partner?" she asked, scratching behind his ears. "Ready for our next adventure?" Max responded with a soft bark, his tail thumping against the porch. Later that day, Sarah arrived at the precinct to a scene of controlled chaos. This animal welfare unit had set up temporary kennels in one of the spare garages, where volunteers and officers worked together to care for the rescued dogs. The sight brought a smile to Sarah's face. It was a far cry from the conditions those animals had endured. "Officer Collins!" A young volunteer waved her over, holding a clipboard. "Can I steal you for a minute? We're short-staffed for the evaluations today." "Of course," Sarah replied, setting her bag down. Max trotted beside her as they approached one of the kennels, where a small terrier mix with patchy fur and timid eyes cowered in the corner. "This little one hasn't let anyone near her," the volunteer explained. "She's terrified." Sarah knelt by the kennel, speaking softly. "Hey there, sweetheart. It's okay. No one's going to hurt you anymore." She opened the gate slowly, allowing Max to enter first. His calm presence often worked miracles with frightened animals. Max approached the terrier gently, lying down a few feet away and resting his head on his paws. The small dog watched him warily at first, but eventually crept closer, sniffing cautiously before curling up beside him. Sarah's heart swelled at the sight. "Looks like Max has another fan," she said with a chuckle, earning a laugh from the volunteer. As the day went on, Sarah couldn't shake an idea that had been forming in the back of her mind. The success of the operation had proven just how much could be accomplished when the right resources and people were involved. She approached Captain Avery later that afternoon, her proposal carefully thought out. "I want to start a program," she began, standing in his office with Max at her side. "A canine rehabilitation and adoption initiative. We could partner with animal welfare groups and use the precinct's resources to give dogs like these a second chance. Some could even be trained for service work or therapy." Avery leaned back in his chair, a thoughtful expression on his face. "That's a big undertaking," he said, "but if anyone can pull it off, it's you and Max." Sarah smiled. "I think we owe it to them and to the community. These dogs deserve better." Weeks later, the program was officially launched, and the precinct's garage was transformed into a fully equipped rehabilitation center. Sarah worked tirelessly alongside Max, overseeing the care and training of the rescued dogs. Each success story brought her a renewed sense of purpose, from a formerly aggressive dog learning to trust again to a once terrified pup finding its forever home. Max became a central figure in the program, his calm demeanor and intuitive nature making him an ideal mentor for the other dogs. Sarah often watched him work with a mix of pride and awe, marveling at the bond they shared. One evening, as Sarah locked up the facility, she sat with Max on a bench overlooking the city skyline. The air was crisp, and the quiet buzz of Atlanta in the distance provided a soothing backdrop. She ran a hand through Max's fur, her thoughts drifting to everything they had accomplished. "You know," she said softly, "we've come a long way, haven't we?" Max turned to look at her, his amber eyes filled with the quiet wisdom she'd come to rely on. His tail wagged once, a simple but meaningful acknowledgement. Sarah smiled, leaning back and letting out a contented sigh. The road ahead might be unpredictable, but with Max by her side, she knew they could face anything together. And as the city lights twinkled in the distance, Sarah felt a quiet certainty settle over her. This wasn't just an ending, it was the start of something extraordinary.